This is Jane Juker, and we're back at your service on KMOX. And if you listened to the last segment, we're debating sort of the minimum wage proposal by the mayor. So previously we had Shane Cohn, who is the sponsor of the legislation in the city of St. Louis to raise just the city of St. Louis's minimum wage up to $15 an hour by the year 2020. It would be stair-stepped up. It would take 4 or 5 years to get there, but it would reach $15 an hour by 2020. Now we're going to look at the other side of this debate. And with me, I have the managing partner of Gateway Group, David Jackson, and he's a consultant for the Missouri Restaurant Association. And obviously that's one sector of the economy and businesses that are watching this proposal very closely. And he's here to talk about some of the concerns that he has heard from the Restaurant Association and other businesses. So, David, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you did you hear Shane Cohn talk about the proponent of the bill? What are your major concerns? Give me the top line concerns you all have first.
Sure. I think to start out, I grew up in Missouri, and my parents were natives of St. Louis. My dad grew up in the Shaw neighborhood, and I lived downtown after I graduated from college for several years, and I think all of us can relate to the frustration when our favorite restaurant or favorite business goes out of business, and we see the economy in St. Louis struggling to keep employers that are moving out. And so in terms of the minimum wage debate, there are two things we have to look at. One, is it legal? And I know, as referenced on the previous call, it's our opinion that it's not in several different areas. The state legislature has spoken and said this needs to be a uniform decision. This needs to be a state decision so we don't have 500 different minimum wages across the state. Secondly, we have to look, even if it was legal, will it work? And I think data also points to the fact that it won't. Before you raise wages, you have to have jobs, and you have to have businesses. And right now, we need to be working to get more businesses and more jobs in the city before we talk about wages.
Now, one of the concerns that Alderman Cohn raised, which is, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the corporate executives who are making record profits and the people at the top, the one percenters, versus, people at the, middle class and even lower middle class are sort of being left behind. Their wages are not growing at the same rate as the corporate executives. How do you address the fact that the disparity, the income disparity in the United States, and I would assume in St. Louis and Missouri, everywhere else, is getting worse and not getting better? And, at some point you have to address that issue.
I think you have to look at who you're trying to help with this policy. If the goal is to help people who are low-skilled workers that are making minimum wage, then raising it to $15 an hour from the current $7.65 an hour doesn't work, because businesses just can't afford to hire somebody at $15 a wage that has no skill. And so you end up creating less jobs. But I think in terms of the disparity, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. To straighten out one, only 7% of the businesses in St. Louis City are chain restaurants, are chain businesses and corporate businesses. The rest, 97% of businesses or 93% of businesses are mom-and-pop independent businesses that aren't associated with a chain. And those are the people that hurt from this, in addition to the people that may be looking at St. Louis to move here, to operate their business, or to start a business that is going to cross that opportunity off the list before we even talk to them, because they're going to go elsewhere. Why would you go into St. Louis City when you can go to Clayton, Webster Grove, St. Charles, or other places? So
what do you say to the fact that that the mayor, aldermen, and other proponents of this have indicated that once you sort of raise, the lower end of the spectrum, that people who make that money, one, will be able to afford the products that they help make, or, be able to afford the services that they're providing to people. And so, therefore, you would have more economic growth because their newer salaries, their newer wages would be put into the economic system. They would be purchasing more, and then it would raise all boats. How do you address that, policy underpinning for this proposal?
I think we all agree with the fact that there's a problem in terms of economic growth and getting more money in more people's pockets to spend and circulate in the economy. But the difference, in our opinion, is that we think that needs to be a regional decision at a state and St. Louis regional effort, in that by St. Louis City doing it alone at $15 an hour, whenever we have a state minimum wage at $7.65 an hour, and we have 92 different municipalities in St. Louis County, not everybody there is going to have increased purchase power, and there's no way you can sustain that as a business. But we also have a lot of people right now who are already making above the minimum wage. The average fast food worker in St. Louis City makes $9 an hour, and so we have to let the market work and let that be the business owner's decision, because by St. Louis doing it on their own, they're only going to isolate themselves because, again, we have to have jobs here and businesses here before we talk about wages.
One interesting statistic that I saw was the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicated that 50% of those making minimum wage, even though, people are under 25 years old, which is a very interesting statistics because that age group, under 25, only makes up sort of 1/5 of the entire workforce, but they make up half of those who make minimum wage. So clearly we have younger workers making, are the biggest percentage of minimum wage workers. And so, and I'm thinking of people like my son. Frankly, the idea that he would make $15 an hour is kind of funny. I mean, he's a lifeguard, and he doesn't just do it in the summer. He works, all year round, indoor pool, outdoor pool. But, I think that that's too much money for him. But then again, I look at when you have a single mother of 3, and she's working at, a minimum wage job, either fast food or maybe a local small business, the current minimum wage just doesn't cut it. How do you balance those two concerns so that you get fairness where fairness is needed, but not fairness where fairness is not needed?
I think that's a good point. You have to look at, again, who you're trying to help, because the proposal here and the proponents of it, I think, are have the assumption that you're going to have more people getting more jobs and getting more money to circulate in the economy. And I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I used to deliver pizzas when I was in high school, and I worked in the restaurant industry from the time I was 15 and until I was in college and through college, and helped pay for my tuition that way. And I think those jobs may not have been available if we would have had a $15 minimum wage, because if I'm a restaurant, let's say I own a local pizza shop in downtown St. Louis, and I'm thinking about whether or not I want to provide that delivery option for a delivery driver. If I have to pay $15 an hour to my minimum wage employees, I'm probably just going to axe that option and decide I'm just going to have people come in, because it's not worth that trade-off. That money has to come from somewhere, and I'm either going to have to raise my prices, or I'm going to have to cut my workforce and provide less job opportunities, and I'm going to keep that middle wage worker that has accumulated some skills. The purpose of the minimum wage is for your low-skilled workers that are accumulating job skills, and as you said, a lot of your high school, college kids, this is their first job in the workforce.
And it doesn't seem to me, I haven't heard a whole lot of discussion on it, that they're not looking to address the high school kids and the, even college kids. I mean, kids that age are on their parents' health insurance until they're 26, so they're subsidized sort of in that way as well. And so I'm not sure that that's what this is aimed at. And so I do think that's an interesting factor. And what's interesting, too, is my understanding is Los Angeles also passed a $15 minimum wage. And one of the concerns that I've heard, and I've wondered if you've heard this from your members, that, the standard of living between, Los Angeles and St. Louis, or maybe New York and St. Louis, or Chicago and St. Louis, is very different. And I think I read somewhere Tim Logan, who was a former reporter here in St. Louis, who now lives in Boston, he said adjusted for standard of living, our minimum wage at 15 would be more like $21 in Los Angeles. So actually we would, from a standard of living standpoint, have a higher minimum wage than what they just passed in Los Angeles. Have your members indicated the regional problems with this?
Yeah, and I haven't seen some numbers on Los Angeles specifically, but I know the Oakland area in California did increase their minimum wage, and I think that was around $12 an hour. And what they saw is a survey of, I think it was around 60-70% of restaurants that said they were moving, or they've raised their prices, or they're thinking about moving because of the hike in the minimum wage. And, again, that money has to come from somewhere and how they balance out. There's only, I think, 1 in 5 restaurants that survive after 5 years, and 1 in 2 don't make a profit in their first year. And so as the Alderman mentioned, in the problem we have with indebtedness and debt with our economy, a huge issue is if you're a small business owner and you're accumulating debt because you're trying to start a business off the ground, that $15 minimum wage isn't going to help, and it's going to increase debt in the economy.
Great. Well, we're here talking with David Jackson, who is the managing partner of the Gateway Group, and he's a consultant for the Missouri Restaurant Association. And we're talking about the minimum wage proposal that has been proposed by Alderman Shane Cohn and supported by Mayor Slay in the city of St. Louis. And he's giving us some of the cons. One thing I wanted to point out is that in 2006, Missouri voters 76% of Missouri voters, which rarely happens in the state, given the rural-urban split and sort of the partisan split we have in this state, approved a hike in the minimum wage and got us to where we are now, which is 40 cents an hour above the minimum wage. Now, I mean, I think that Missourians believe that the minimum wage ought to be adequate, and I think that if given a proposal, that they obviously would support it, and they've obviously supported more than what the feds are doing. And I've seen that 3 have been filed for 2016. So, I know that one of the concerns, and I wanted to see if you've heard this, is that, why are we not waiting for the state to take care of this, or by initiative to have the people take care of it in the 2016 election?
I think that's a good point. And Jane, we are actively speaking with the different parties and stakeholders on the state level, both the state legislature and the different interest groups involved with this, because we think that it does need to be a state decision for regional growth to make sure that people have enough money in their pocket, but we also don't have a fractured wage system where, like we said in St. Louis, you could have 92 different minimum wages. If you have a restaurant that moves from St. Louis City in the Loop to Clayton or to Webster Groves, that doesn't necessarily help the region. That just creates another empty storefront in St. Louis City. And so I think we do need to have those discussions at the state level, why lawmakers put a state law in place that says municipalities cannot raise the minimum wage above the state level. And St. Louis City clearly does not have the authority to do this under state law.